Welcome to the Old Testament Bible Journey. Otterbein Church in Waynesboro is offering this journey as a one-year devotional plan that will give you an overview of the whole Old Testament. My name is Mark Green, and I'm one of the pastors here at Otterbein. Today, we're going to begin the journey through the book of Genesis, or as it's known as the book of beginnings. Let's begin with a conversation about structure, author, and focus of the book. We want to do that as we open up each book. The structure of Genesis is rather straightforward. There are two main parts. Chapters 1 through 11 introduce us to the main character and describes what the main character is doing. The opening words introduce the main character. In the beginning, God. This is important because it communicates an essential Christian truth. Only God can reveal God. We would know nothing of God if He had not revealed Himself in His Word and in Jesus Christ. Genesis, like the whole Bible, tells the story of God. Therefore, Genesis is first an invitation to discover God, learn about Him, come to understand what He is doing in the world that He has created. So chapters 1 through 11 describe and communicate God as Creator. It is He who formed all things visible and invisible. These chapters describe the beginning of the universe, humanity, and sadly sin and punishment. Chapters 12 through 50 then describe God forming a people to whom He will reveal Himself and who are then expected to go out and reveal God to the entire world. Genesis 12:3 sums this up well. God said, "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." It's the introduction of the Abrahamic covenant. So we're going to get to that. So who wrote the book? Well, first, one thing we can say is that whoever wrote the book had to get all their information directly from God because God was the only one there. No one was there at creation, so whoever wrote the book had to be given this information in this story by God Himself. Second, most conservative scholars anyway attribute the Pentateuch, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, to Moses. The evidence is all through the Pentateuch. Exodus 34:4 says, "And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord." This is a reference to the covenant. And we learn that Moses was the scribe for the Ten Commandments in Exodus 24:27. Deuteronomy 31:9 reads, "Then Moses wrote this law," which means much of Deuteronomy was recorded by him. We also have references in Leviticus 4 that communicate that God spoke to Moses and he wrote it down. Finally, Jewish and early Christian tradition associates these books with Moses. Now, some scholars believe that Moses recorded Genesis at Mount Sinai as God was establishing Israel as a nation, because in essence, Genesis acts as the origin story for the nation of Israel. We can't be 100% sure when it was written or that it was written by Moses, but the evidence seems to support that. Now, when was the book written or recorded? Well, because most scholars believe that Moses wrote it, it had to happen after he left Egypt and before he died at 128, 30 years of age. So it had to happen somewhere in there. Well, most believe that he recorded this at Mount Sinai. If that is accurate, so it's written after the Exodus to a freed people who had been in slavery for hundreds of years. For them, and God had seemed to be silent for several hundred years, and their lives were saturated with Egyptian idolatry. Genesis then becomes a Potomac against Egyptian false gods and against Egyptian idolatry. Here's an example. If you notice the creation account, plants are created on day 3, but the sun is not created until day 4. How, we would ask, can plants grow without the sun? Well, the point is that the sun does not bring life. God brings life. God is the one causing things to grow. The Egyptians worshipped a sun god, and in Deuteronomy, God tells Israel not to worship the sun and the stars. How is the sun and moon described? As the greater light and the lesser light. The point is, the sun is just a light. It is not a god. The Israelites and you and I need to be reminded of that. Even though the Egyptians worship the sun, God is saying you are a distinct people who worship not the sun, but the one who created the sun. All right, with that, let's move to this week's reading. Genesis chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to skip chapter 5 and read chapter 6. Chapters 1 and 2 describe creation, while chapters 3 through 6 record the fallout from the fall of Adam and Eve. By the way, if you want a glimpse into what heaven is going to be like, focus on chapters 1 and 2. This is what creation was like. This was what everything was like before sin entered the world. We get a beautiful image of what heaven will be like. And one day, Revelation tells us God will renovate all of creation and restore it back to its Genesis beauty. Well, let me begin with saying something about Genesis that may surprise you. The primary focus of the text is the primary focus is theological. It is not scientific. Genesis is not intended to be a defense of creationism versus evolution. It's not concerned with old earth and new earth type issues. When you and I read the creation account, we do so from the perspective of this century, where we can look down on earth and see pictures of a round earth from space and get a glimpse of what the whole earth is like. We tend to view it as a globe. The Israelites did not have that view. The ancient Israelite looked at the world as one on earth looking at the world around them. They had no access to pictures of earth taken from space. Therefore, we need to read the book through the spiritual theological lens, not a scientific lens. If you read it scientifically, you're going to have trouble answering some questions. It is not a scientific book. It is a theological, spiritual book. So with that in mind, notice how God creates. This is so amazing. God creates in several ways. Number one, by speaking. You notice the repeated use of the phrase, "and God said." This speaks to God's power and his personal involvement in creation. God also creates by separation. He separated the light from the darkness, the water above from the waters below, the waters under the heavens from the land, separated day and night. And I think we get an early glimmer here of the holiness of God, this idea of separation unto the Lord. He also creates by multiplication. God brought forth vegetation with seeds to multiply. Birds and ocean animals were created and called to multiply. And I think this speaks to God's desire for harmony and care amongst his creation. So one more thought about creation before we move on. Why are there two accounts of creation? Well, the first account describes creation, while the second one tends to flesh out the first, especially in regards to the role of humanity. Humanity is above the creation in animals. Perhaps this is a direct attack on the Egyptian belief called the potter's wheel, or the Khnum myth. Egyptian tradition taught that a ram-headed god, Khnum, molded humanity from the rich silt and clay of the Nile River on a potter's wheel. He crafted each person and their vital life force before breathing the breath of life into them. That was a common Egyptian tradition and belief. Genesis destroys this belief. Once again, something a newly freed people and soon to be nation needed to understand. Completely, they need to leave Egyptian theology and idols behind. All that culture needs to be left there. You are a God people. As you read the great rebellion of Adam and Eve in chapter 3, take note of verse 15. You will hear the gospel presented right there in Genesis chapter 3. Check out verses 22 to 24. Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and also take from the tree of life and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east side of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Why did God cast him out of the garden? because he did not want them to eat from the tree of life. It was an act of grace. If they had eaten from that tree, they would have remained in a state of sin for all eternity. By ensuring that that did not happen, God made salvation possible and eternity apart from sin a reality. So as you turn to chapters 4 and 6, notice how quickly sin changes the lives and behavior of people. Cain's murder of Abel was not some hot-headed decision. It was premeditated and planned. He did not master his sin, and God cast him away, and Cain goes on to establish a city of violence, as demonstrated by Lamech, who lived by the mantra, "If you hurt me, I will hurt you back more." We're not going to read Genesis 5, but a brief comment is useful. It's a genealogy, and it traces 10 generations of the faithful line of Adam to Seth to Noah. After the flood, the lifespan of people will gradually shorten. The point of this is to emphasize a faithful remnant to God and to highlight the impact of sin on humanity. Chapter 6 offers us insight into how God viewed what was happening on earth as a prelude to the flood narrative. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, "I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That's verses 5 through 8 of chapter 6. Verse 8 provides a beautiful contrast to verses 5 to 7. Humanity has been plunged into evil, and so quickly, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. There was one who continued to be faithful to God. Men and women, the world around us is evil, but you and I and the church of God should be the ones who remain faithful and stand with him. Finally, as you read these verses describing the construction of the ark, notice that there's no rudder and there's no sails. The ark was intended to float and to protect the inhabitants, but God would be the one determining the destination of the boat. He would be the one who determines where it goes, where it lands. My friends, welcome to the Old Testament. I hope and pray you will discover God more deeply, know him more intimately, and most importantly, be conformed to the image of Christ. Finally, don't forget to download the questions, as it'll help guide your thinking this week as you read these first few chapters of Genesis. Enjoy your reading, and I look forward to seeing you next time.